Hello, everybody. I'm Andromeda Yu, and that's not my real name, but I'll explain it later. And I'm going to read today the first, about a third of part 1 of this book, 30 Years in the Golden North. And I know this is the very first video that I have ever done, so don't judge me too hard. But if there's anything that I really need to change besides the lighting, because I know that it's very, very weird, let me know nicely and offer me a solution. Thank you. 30 Years in the Golden North. Through Siberia to the Arctic Ocean. When I returned home in the autumn of 1928, I was upset at hearing of the sad end of Rudolf Tesnolidek, the author. It was through him that the first book of my adventures was published, and I had been looking forward to spinning yarns about all the things that I had not been able to write down through not having any skill at this particular subject, so that another book could be brought out, containing all I had forgotten about, while I was sitting up at nights in Hamburg over my papers by the light of a candle, or that I was unable to write down for lack of time. I almost felt inclined to go back to my cave in New Siberia and take with me the memory of all my adventures, of all that I had seen and experienced. I felt sorry about it. Nearly all the time that I was living up in the north, during all the winter months, while the islands were trembling beneath the terrible blows of the freezing ocean, and my dogs were howling with terror in the passages, I sat on my bed, which reminded me of a tomb cut out of a rock, with an oil lamp beside me, and there I wrote down everything that had happened in the previous years. In that way, I kept a pretty good account of the many adventures which went to make up my life, and fresh memories had revived during my stay in Europe, when people asked me questions about this and that. And I was to take all this back with me and to die with it up there, among the ice, to the very ends of the earth. To tell the truth, I did not feel very much inclined for that. So I was really glad when I found an opportunity of putting into another detailed book all of my adventures, which were not contained in my first book. During my lectures in Czechoslovakia, I met with people who pointed out that in my first book, there are descriptions of various adventures of myself and my comrades, which do not hang properly together so as to give at least some idea of how my life proceeded up north, and how I worked my way up from a common wandering apprentice to the chief of an Eskimo tribe and a well-to-do trader. So in this new book, I want to tell my story bit by bit. In my life, there must be no secrets kept from my fellow countrymen. The kind of life which I lived for 30 years did not seem to me to be so curious at the time. It was only when I came to Europe and saw that scarcely any of the things were believed which I had long come to look upon as the most common trifles of everyday life, that I realized what an unusual life I had led, and that it was my duty to describe it. A great resolution. I will begin at the point where my life in the north really started, when I made up my mind to wander off to the region of the Arctic Ocean. It was at Irkutsk, when I was employed as a locksmith on the building of a bridge in the Trans-Siberian Railway. I should like to describe this journey in detail in all its bearings. I am quite sure that few similar undertakings have been carried out under such hazardous circumstances, and I am proud of having performed that journey. I often wonder when it occurred to me to make my way from Irkutsk across the endless regions of Siberia to the distant north to seek my fortune there. The idea first struck me in the summer of 1893, when we were all busy on the Siberian Railway. There were all sorts of people who met on this job, and in the evenings they used to spin yarns, and so I got to hear various odds and ends. Some workmen used to say that the far north was a country where any man with a good pair of hands and a good head on his shoulders could make himself independent, so that he need not be at the beck and call of others. I was a young man at the time, and my head was full of ideas about the wide, wide world. I was very far from being a novice at tramping. Why, as far back as 1884, when I was a young locksmith's apprentice, I had made my way on foot from Zagreb to Genoa, from there to Trieste, to Bosnia, to Serbia, to Romania, and back again home. I had spent 4 years on the tramp like that, and I had been on foot over quite a good stretch of the world, even before I tramped back to Genoa and made my way from there, before the mast, to North America, back again across the Atlantic Ocean, along the shores of West Africa, as far as Table Mountain, and across the Indian Ocean to Vladivostok, Port Arthur, and then to Baikal. So when I heard the talk about life in the north, where there was a need for real men, where, although death was everywhere on the lurk, but where a cautious, experienced, and resourceful man could make his fortune, I began to think the matter over. Supposing I were to make my way from there on foot, across the whole of Siberia as far as the Arctic Ocean. It is true that the terrors of an unknown continent lay between me and my uncertain goal, but I heard that a number of political convicts, although handcuffs, had managed, after wandering for several years, to traverse dense forests and deserts, besides crossing huge rivers. And then they were outlaws, who always had to be on the alert, so as not to be caught by the Cossacks and scourged to death, or sent back to their captivity. Most of them were people who were at death's door, so broken down were they in health. If they had managed it, why shouldn't I, who was young, strong, healthy, and experienced, and had quite a useful bit of money put by, enough to last me for a few years? There was something which said to me, "You'll do it. Your luck will see you through." But then, when I heard about the wild animals, the treacherous swamps where men were stung to death by gnats, about the dreary deserts where white bones of men or animals were the only signs that there had been ever any life there, I hesitated. Meanwhile, the summer came to an end, and the work on the railway bridge also ended. All of us who had been working there together were scattered to the four winds. I made my way to the village of Kamostok, at a distance of 27 versts from Irkutsk. Living was cheaper there than in the town, and I was still pondering over my plan, so I couldn't afford to squander my money. There I lodged with a peasant, and I still have pleasant memories of him. He was a kind fellow, such as I have rarely met with. Once upon a time, he had been a political prisoner. He had gone through much hardship and suffering, and that is why he had a kind heart. I passed nearly the whole of the winter with him, extremely cheaply. For 2 rubles a week, I had more food and drink than I needed. In return for this kindness, I used to go into the forest and chop wood for him. In the midst of this contented life, there came a day which was a turning point in my life. I was sitting in a Jewish inn at Kamostok, and 2 strangers entered and sat down at my table. We drank together, our tongues began to wag, and we told each other about our adventures. When they discovered that they were talking to a trustworthy man who would not give them away, they let out that they were political prisoners, who, many years before, had escaped from a convict station far up in the north, and had crossed Siberia to this spot. I couldn't take my eyes off them. Here, at last, were the men who could tell me, from their own experience, whether I could venture on the journey from Irkutsk to the Arctic Ocean. But for the time being, I just listened to their story without saying anything myself. They said that they were Poles, and that they had once been well-to-do and in a good position. Now, of course, as I could tell from their remarks, they were living from hand to mouth. The way they most frequently earned a livelihood was by making their way to a farmer and threatening to set fire to his house unless he gave them something. I now saw how misery could turn honest men into rogues. But I could not stop to think of such trifles as these, for I was now chiefly concerned about discovering from them something definite about the journey to northern Siberia. So I cross-questioned them and found out that how they had got away, how many deserts, forests, and settlements they had passed through, and how cautious they had had to be at every step. They could never stop anywhere, and they had to keep away from the settlements of any size, or else they would have been caught. In one village they attacked the blacksmith at night, and by threatening to kill him, forced him to take their handcuffs off. They were now making their way to Manchuria, and pretended to be Russian farmers who were looking for good soil. When at last I came out with my plan, they showed no surprise, but on the contrary approved of my idea. The north, they said, was a real paradise for a capable and careful man. They described to me in detail which way I should have to go, mentioning all the towns and smaller settlements, all the deserts and rivers, with the distances, and they gave me an idea of about how long it would take me to manage the various sections of the journey. They spoke so convincingly that all my doubts vanished. They advised me to buy a small 2-wheeled cart and a small horse because that would make the journey more comfortable, and also the cart would make a good, safe bed. Of course, in the winter I should have to find shelter somewhere, because during the winter months I should not be able to get along. And they also advised me to make Krasnoyarsk the starting point of my journey. From Irkutsk to the river Lena, they said, was much nearer, but on the other hand, the country was not so easy to cross as the plain between Krasnoyarsk and the region of the upper Lena.